notes on the County Cavan Regiment, Ulster Volunteer Force. Now, like so many other areas of Ireland, the English crown plantations of the 16th and 17th centuries would come to define the demographics and political battles of County Cavan for generations. County Cavan originally was regarded as a part of the province of Connacht, and that was until a de facto transfer, if you like, in 1584. And it was the plantation of Ulster specifically, beginning in 1610, that would establish Cavan's future character. That enterprise, with an influx of Protestant, English and Scottish pioneers, was directly responsible for the creation of several important Cavan settlements, including Ballyborough, Killashandra and Coothill. And the decades that followed brought further Protestant settlers from beyond Ireland, stimulated by the English Civil War and surrounding conflicts. Now, disputes between these newcomers and the native Catholic population, the native Irish population, would raise their head on a regular basis during the 18th and 19th centuries. Sometimes with the foundation purely in economic issues, sometimes political, all tended to become quasi-religious in nature. If religion was not a bone of contention initially in a dispute, it soon came to be a factor. After the Armagh disturbances that brought the Orange Order into existence in 1795, after the Battle of the Diamond near Loughgall, by 1798 there were already 32 Orange Lodges established in Cavan, and that very quickly increased to 37. And at this time, the county was second in Ireland in its Orange presence only to Armagh, who had 78 lodges, and Tyrone, who had 64. Monaghan had actually only 18. A fact that helps to indicate the level of inter-community schism within its boundaries. Despite some serious reservations within the county's Protestant population, the Act of Union in 1801 soon garnered their almost unanimous support. Strong economic ties with an economically thriving Belfast and other centres within North East Ireland added to the sense of ethnic and religious difference from their neighbours, and it placed them firmly in the Unionist camp. The most important manifestation for this sense of difference became manifest in the Orange Order, which rose to become a very important social and political structure in the county. Indeed, Cavan was actually still electing a Unionist MP right up until 1874, when that year it was the first of 3 border counties to lose its Unionist representation in Parliament. On that occasion, the soon-to-be leader of Ulster Unionism, Edward Saunderson, lost his West Cavan seat. The same year, famous Orangeman and Unionist William Johnson, of MP of Ballykilbeg, visited Belturbet in West Cavan to open a new Orange Hall, with it reported that a crowd of between 7,000 and 8,000 were in attendance. Now, the staunch nature of Orangeism in Cavan is probably best illustrated in 1880 within the Irish Land War episode that famously delivered a brand new word into the English language. The organised ostracism following evictions from the Earl of Ern's farmland in Mayo eventually saw a tactic emerge that took the name of his land agent, Major Charles Cunningham Boycott. The situation, which before evictions, the Earl had actually offered 10% rent reductions to his tenants, which was refused, became a cause célèbre for unionism across the British Isles. Many went as far as to volunteer their services to harvest their crops. Eventually, a relatively low-key solution was reached to avoid the possibility of sectarian violence in Mayo that had the prospect of rapidly spreading, with a party of 57 Cavan and Monaghan Orangemen travelling west to fulfil the work required. The 25 Cavan Orangemen were later awarded medals for their role in the affair. The emergence of the first Home Rule crisis in 1886 saw a demonstration of the same staunch Orange and Unionist positions in the county. Within a detailed muster roll of an Orange Army released primarily to the English media, the 3rd Brigade of the 4th Division was said to include Cavan men with their base in Belturbet. The muster roll appears to have been solely a paper exercise. However, it was to be very prophetic of events in the decades to come. During the second Home Rule crisis in 1893, the Ulster Defence Union was formed as a more physical lobby against the bill. Across Ulster, delegates were appointed in each parliamentary constituency in a ratio according to its Unionist electorate. Within this body's 600-man assembly were 10 representatives from the East Cavan parliamentary constituency and 11 from West Cavan. And that same year saw the birth of the Unionist Club movement. And R.I.C. intelligence soon alleged that 11 Cavan Unionist clubs were operating with a membership of 2,500. By 1911, despite composing just 18.5% of the population, the geographical distribution of Cavan Unionists meant they had no county council representation. This was in contrast to a small but not totally insignificant 8 Unionist councillors out of a total of 49 in Monaghan and Donegal. This lack of Cavan Unionist political representation undoubtedly helped to garner support for the Ulster Covenant campaign of September 1912. It was a phenomenal local success and arguably had the highest percentage uptake of the Protestant population of any Ulster county. Over 4,000 men signed the Covenant, with similar numbers signing the Female Declaration. Almost all of those eligible to sign in what was a total Protestant population of all ages of just over 16,000. The aftermath of the Covenant saw the introduction of a new tactic from Ulster Unionism. In a bid to unite those bodies already who had started drilling, instill discipline, and to create a central control and indeed craft a formidable PR tool, the Unionist leadership inaugurated the Ulster Volunteer Force in late 1912. The goal of the force was to create a mass movement, an Orange Army, circa 1886, but this time it was not just to be a paper exercise. Across Ulster, county committees were appointed to oversee recruitment, organisation and equipping of this body. The most prominent names within Cavan Unionism were 2 men who would come to symbolise the anti-Home Rule movement in the county and indeed its future role within the Great War. Arthur Kenlis Maxwell, more better known as Lord Farnham, and Colonel Oliver Stuart Wood Nugent. Lord Farnham was considered to be a hardliner within Irish Unionism during the early 20th century. At a meeting of the Cavan, Kilmore and Ballyhay Unionist clubs and the West Cavan Women's Unionist Association held in Cavan Protestant Hall on the 23rd of February 1913, he labelled Home Rule a nefarious conspiracy. According to Farnham, Ulster must bar its way. Within the nationalist community, he became a hated figure. Indeed, even before Covenant Day, in July 1912, the ancestral Farnham statue in Cavan Town was severely damaged, reportedly to the extent that it would take the extraordinary sum of £400 to repair. In June 1913, the Farnham name was being mentioned in the pages of newspapers internationally when a lorry bound for the Farnham estate was impounded in Dublin. marked as furniture. The van had travelled from the firm of John Ferguson and Co. of London. It contained 500 rifles. The Ferguson firm was widely implicated in the importation of arms to Unionists throughout 1912 and 1913. The attempted importation of arms to Cavan would appear to have stimulated an immediate reaction and growing militancy within Irish nationalism. And at the June monthly meeting of Cavan District Council, Councillor Michael Riley called on nationalists to start drilling. Now, in contrast to the position of Farnham as this hawk within unionism, Oliver Nugent was a much more reserved figure. The son of Major St George Nugent, a very senior judge and MP for Coleraine. He was educated at Harrow and Sandhurst before being commissioned into the Royal Munster Fusiliers as a lieutenant. It is perhaps the distinguished service and what he witnessed that followed in British India that imbued in him a more restrained approach than other senior unionists. And whilst never disowning his involvement in the Ulster Volunteers in later years, he was acknowledged as being retrospectively uncomfortable with it. In retirement, he wrote that he had always disagreed with the tactic of a physical force movement, opposing Home Rule. A manifestation of this belief is most notable in his attempts to early on brand the Cavan contingent of the Ulster Volunteers as the CVF, the Cavan Volunteer Force, and model it as a more public order / policing body. A comprehensive document detailing Nugent's efforts survives, entitled The CVF Scheme. Within its pages, he outlines at length the nature of how he believes the body should be organised and why. It opens by acknowledging that the CVF is a part of the UVF, but clarifies the position by stating, before we commit ourselves to any particular form of organisation, it is desirable to consider to what extent, if any, the particular circumstances of the County of Cavan may render advisable a modification of the conditions of service, which, though applicable to other parts of Ulster, may be unsuited to this county. In describing what would suit the County Cavan, its position was outlined in detail. The county is surrounded on the east, south and west, and partly to the north by nationalist counties. Except to the very north, there are no organised unionists similar to the Ulster Volunteer Force. Quoting this isolation, it was then remarked that it is clear that as far as this county is concerned, there will be no men available for other work after the requirements of home defence have been provided for. Now, the document is very careful not to criticise the UVF and the rest of the province, or indeed disown it. Instead, it sells the concept of a civil defence force in Cavan as helping any future provisional government of Ulster in its own particular way, namely reducing the possibility of sectarian confrontation. The county must stand on its own and should not ask for or seek any assistance from outside its boundaries unless a last resort. The organisation defined by Nugent in the CVF scheme had nothing in common with the military organisation the Ulster Volunteers were becoming elsewhere. The explanation of this reasoning behind the scheme were followed up with very, very detailed plans of organisation and structure, how it should be distributed and how it should be commanded, right down to the roles and responsibilities of different officers. military titles and terms were not to be used, were avoidable. Instructions for the preparation of local defence plans were outlined, with such headings as house defence, alarm posts, communications and signals, food and clothing, and then committees to prepare further schemes. Now, despite the nature of the document showing a lot of restraint and very logical forethought, it is notable that the use of arms was not ruled out, and that when turning out for duty, every man should be armed. The manuscript very clearly demonstrates the planning and military acumen of Nugent, acumen that would later be demonstrated during the Great War. There was, however, undoubtedly major schism within the county regarding the scheme. Farnham totally opposed it, to the extent that he wrote in writing to UVF HQ in Belfast to express his disapproval and outline his reservations and concerns about Nugent's commitment to unionism. In the event, a compromise scenario appears to have evolved that took on some minor elements of the proposed CVF, but more so an approach more conventional in terms of the entire Ulster Volunteers. According to R.I.C. Inspector County Cavan, Cavan was among the first counties to embrace this organisation. In January 1913, it was acknowledged, while it was the Orange and Unionist clubs in Cavan who were drilling, that enrolment was underway into the UVF. In February, the inspector stated that practically every unionist had signed membership forms, and in March, drilling with weapons was taking place within the grounds of Lord Farnham's estate over 1 year before the famous Larne gun-running episode. A detailed report in July gave the strength of the local UVF as being around 2,500, with the R.I.C. inspector stating that he believed that around 1,000 of these were regarded as effectives. Ex-soldiers and police to the number of 20 were acting as drill instructors, and it was believed that the Cavan Ulster Volunteers had already 230 rifles in its possession. Now, based on the surviving official documents that each county was required to submit to headquarters in Belfast, R.I.C. estimations of Cavan membership during the entire crisis at all stages actually appear to overestimate the strength of the local force. The Cavan monthly return form of April 1913 detailed a County Cavan regiment of 1,635 men, divided into a basis of East and West Cavan, underneath both separate parliamentary constituencies. By the 21st of December 1913, that number had increased to 1,920. Remember, this is an official internal UVF communication, and it later apparently peaks at 2,065, with a 3-battalion strong County Cavan regiment of the Ulster Volunteers now established under Oliver Nugent as regimental commander. Historian David Fitzpatrick calculated that 20.5% of Cavan Protestants enlisted into the force. That equates to over half of all those eligible to joining up. Now, this can contrast to just 16.1% in Tyrone, 11.6% in Armagh, and just 7.6% in Belfast. The 1st Battalion was underneath the command of Lord Farnham himself, later replaced by F.L. Clement Scott whenever the war broke out and Farnham went to war. A mark of the commitment of the regiment is that from an early stage it is also noted as having a 4-member team of administration staff. The county secretary was William Matthews of Church Street, Cavan. The 1st Battalion under Farnham covered the districts of Cavan, Arva, Killashandra, Ballyjamesduff and Coothill, essentially West Cavan. The 2nd Battalion was under Captain Somerset Saunderson of Castle Saunderson, who also took on the role of regimental commander after the Great War when Nugent enlisted or re-enlisted. It composed of the Ulster Volunteers in the Belturbet and Ballyconnell districts, essentially Mid-Cavan and North Cavan. The 3rd Battalion was underneath the command of Boer War veteran Captain Mervyn Pratt of Cabra Castle until the outbreak of the Great War, later replaced by T.J. Chambers of the Laurels, Baileyborough. Its numbers were composed of the strongest Orange and Unionist part of County Cavan, the greater Baileyborough area. The county designation ladder that could be seen on the back of its lapel badges was D. Unlike Monaghan, that had a Unionist newspaper during the period in the form of the Northern Standard, Cavan had no Unionist print media outlet since back in 1907 when the Cavan Weekly News folded. The lack of this local Unionist media coverage leaves a bit of a gap in local reportage of events. However, from the pages of the Nationalist Anglo-Celt newspaper, the Northern Standard, and newspapers in other adjacent counties, combined with R.I.C. reports, it's possible to build up a picture of UVF activity and Unionist attitudes and actions in Cavan during 1913 and 1914. The first major demonstration of Cavan volunteer strength came in August 1913 when they joined their comrades of the Monaghan Regiment in Newbliss. There they were reviewed by Sir Edward Carson. While the Irish nationalist papers acknowledged that around 2,000 volunteers were present from both counties, it also chose to point out that many of the volunteers were so aged as to find it difficult to mark time. Captain James Craig, Carson's deputy and arguably the strategist behind the Ulster Unionist anti-Home Rule campaign, visited Ballymachue in October in the very south of Cavan near Ballyjamesduff. There he told the assembled throngs that although they were on a borderland, they were as much a part of Ulster as if they were in County Down, County Antrim or County Londonderry. Another major review came in December 1913 when the UVF Commander Sir George Richardson visited Castle Saunderson to review the local volunteers under the command of Captain Somerset Saunderson. The same month, Lord Farnham reviewed several units at Castle Hamilton that included volunteers from Port Longfield and from Killigyar, UVF County Leitrim. Again, the nationalist media was very disparaging, stating that no one looking at the squad would be equal to saying anything. As an aside, it is also reported that Farnham attended at least one review of the UVF within County Leitrim itself. In January 1914 at Killigyar, the Leitrim County Inspector wrote that 4 branches were inspected at Killigyar House, although it was referred to in the media as a review of the Orange Volunteer Force as opposed to the UVF. That very, very southeastern corner of the County Leitrim, centred around Carraghallan and Newtown Gore, had a very strong Orange presence at this time, and indeed today still has an Orange presence. The County UVF held a camp of instruction for its officers in March 1914 at Farnham, Castle Farnham, home of Lord Farnham, just outside Cavan. The agenda for this 7-day camp or 5-day camp from the 8th to the 6-day camp from the 8th to the 14th of the month was laid out in considerable detail. For example, the schedule for the 12th included battalion drill by instructors from 7 to 8 a.m. From 9:30 to 12:30, there were lectures in principles of outposts, battalion in extended order, aiming drill and miniature rifle practice. From 2 to 5 p.m, outposts as by night by companies, squad drill and rifle practice by the different districts. Given the details surviving from this camp, while some might question its true military value, few could doubt the commitment and efficiency involved in its organisation. In all, 121 men attended, made up of company commanders, their second in command, squad leaders and section leaders, with 3 instructors taking the various lectures and activities, and 2 cooks catering the camp. A Manchester correspondent who visited the Cavan regiment to report on for his own newspaper the same month noted in his report that in places not homogeneously Protestant, the volunteers are better organised and better prepared for resistance than they are in Belfast. Of the Cavan men, he reflected that what he witnessed would not have been discreditable to an average territorial battalion. So high praise from the Manchester correspondent. Despite his reserved nature and his attempts to reduce tension, Oliver Nugent still found himself under attack in the local press in March for being part of the volunteer organisation. On all occasions, however, his deliberate, low-key and non-confrontational approach in addressing criticism was really obvious. In an interview again to a Manchester paper, the Manchester Guardian, in April 1914, Nugent stated that, "I am an Irishman, and home rule or no home rule, there are a lot of us who will have to live in Ireland among our Catholic neighbours." Nugent's attempts to maintain a level of calm within the county were difficult on occasion. In March, Ballyjamesduff Protestant Church was set on fire, and possibly confrontation was only avoided by the very quick arrest of the culprit. Remarkably, in some fine detective work, James Brodie was identified by footprints at the scene matching his shoes. Incidents did not always come from one side. In May, a Sunday church parade took place at Belturbet in West Cavan, with 400 Ulster volunteers present from County Cavan, some travelling from Monaghan, some travelling from the south of South Fermanagh, and some from East Leitrim. Following the service on the return home of the volunteers that night, shots were fired at one Edward King, a Catholic of Riverside. In one report of the incident, while the Anglo-Celt newspaper kept up its record of being disparaging towards the fitness of the men, county loyalty remarkably came into play, and they identified the corps of men from Cavan as seemingly the best setup of the 4 counties present. A more amiable relationship between rival factions, and perhaps more down to the power of alcohol than anything else, was described in June when the Celt reported that both Ulster volunteers and Irish volunteers had joined together in formation and marched as one body. The cause uniting the men was a cockfight at Killashandra, and the united march came as all of those present had been heading home after the entertainment. Despite the Killashandra episode, the county R.I.C. inspectors' reports for June and July did not leave room for a positive viewpoint as to the future of Cavan. In June, the Ulster Volunteer Force were described as numbering 3,461. That figure never was remotely neared, according to official UVF documents. Being armed with modern carbines and believed to have 2 Maxim guns, 2 heavy grade machine guns. The very quickly growing Irish volunteers were said to be poorly armed, but having the vastly superior number of 5,529 men. By July, the Irish volunteers had increased by almost a further 1,000 men. That month, the inspector stated that the outlook is dangerous. Like elsewhere across Ireland, the outbreak of the Great War had an immediate effect on the situation. Despite the marching and the drilling continuing, indeed, men from Belturbet Company were recorded as marching fully armed in August after the outbreak of the Great War. Tensions, irrespective, eased considerably. The R.I.C. inspector, from saying the outlook was bleak, now noted that feeling between both branches of the volunteers was now much better, and that there was no support for the Germans. For many, the focus changed to the events on the front. Within the ranks of the UVF, many within the command immediately took their place within the armed forces. Oliver Nugent took command of the 36th Ulster Division with distinction, and Lord Farnham and Captain Pratt were among other senior officers who served. Like County Monaghan, and indeed parts of County Armagh and across Ulster, many within the lower ranks of the rural UVF were more reluctant to enlist. A combination of fear for land and family while they were away, and what they might have to come back to or not come back to being important influencing factors. Many did answer the call, however. Some within the rank of the 9th Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers, the new army unit of Kitchener's army set up for the Ulster Volunteers of counties Armagh, County Cavan and County Monaghan, whilst others would serve alongside their Catholic neighbours and Irish volunteer members in a range of units all across the British Isles. In all, County Cavan would lose approximately 1,000 men during the Great War. The bullets and the shells on the fields of battle did not distinguish between the Cavan Protestant and Ulster Volunteer and the Cavan Catholic and Irish Volunteer.